One of the most important things you can do on your farm every year is pull plant tissue samples. We want to talk about that today.
Well, as commodity prices dropped over the last few years, a lot of guys have said, oh man, I got to cut back on my fertilizer use because that's a big expense for me. And really, it's not a matter of, well, I have to cut back. It's, I got to be smart about how I'm investing these dollars. And when you're putting fertilizer out there, do you really know if you put 10 pounds too much of potassium out there or if you're putting 20 pounds too little? The only way you can find out is actually asking the plants. And what I'm talking about here is plant tissue analysis. So we're taking key parts of that plant, sending them to a lab, finding out what the nutrient content is, and seeing if we're low and deficient or if we're high or excessive.
Okay, so what we want you to do is in all the grass crop, just take one field to start with and sample it every single week during the growing season, at least 8 to 12 weeks. Okay, start immediately, right when that corn pops out of the ground or wheat, and sample first thing every Monday morning. Call it 8 o'clock every Monday morning. We want to do the same time of day, the same day of the week. Pick 2 spots in your field. Just take a look at last year's yield map. Pick the worst spot and pick the best spot. And go to those 2 spots and go back every single week and pull samples. You can go to MidwestLabs.com. You can also find this information on AgPhD.com in terms of what part of the plant you need to take, because it does change throughout the season. Very early on, you'll take the whole plant. Later on, you'll just take certain leaves. But anyway, you want to take those leaves, you want to put them in a paper bag and send them in for analysis. You want to do this over a period of time because all a tissue sample is going to tell you is, what do we have for nutrients in the plant that day? It doesn't tell us anything more than that. So that's why we want to have 8 to 12 weeks worth of data.
And for broadleaf crops like soybeans, for example, many times the plant tissue analysis early in the season doesn't tell us a whole lot because the soybean plant needs so many of its nutrients later in the season, like around the reproductive stages. So many farmers are just waiting till just before reproduction and they start pulling samples, like in the north where we have a lot of soybean flowering happening after the shortening of the days. We'll go mid-June and start pulling some plant tissue analysis and then pull it all the way through the reproductive phases.
Yeah, and you can certainly run it all season long, but we would tell you, we haven't found much information early in the season, so maybe save the money for the first 4 weeks and then spend the money later on. So still go 8 to 12 weeks, just start with broadleaves a little bit later in the season.
Okay, I got a couple of things there. I really liked Brian's 8 to 12 week approach because you can see trends happening and you don't see, hey, I got a big rain, it pushed lots of nutrients into my plant and everything looked good for a few days. Okay, that's fine. It's going to wear off over time. So you want to see, all right, how does it look? And then you can even chart when you got some rains if you like, or just look up online and find out when those rains happen, because you'll normally see a spike of nutrients into the plant around those rainfall events. The other thing that we were talking about here is some of the micronutrients, and I think it's just critical that when you're running this plant tissue analysis, you don't just do it for N, P, and K. You've got to do it for all the nutrients that you really want to see analyzed. That way you get a picture of what's going on. The other thing that I'd say is pick a couple areas in your field. Maybe you pick a very highly productive area, an area that always gets you your best yield, and then you pick that spot that you say, man, no matter what I do over there, I can get 200 bushel corn on the rest of the field, but I get 100 bushel in that spot. Take a sample over there. Over that 8 or 12 week period, I think you're going to find out what's going on. Maybe there's something going on there that you can fix to try to improve productivity in both areas of your farm.
Darren and I have had the good fortune to visit with lots of really high yield farmers around the United States and really around the world. And I can just tell you that almost invariably, these farmers are using plant tissue analysis. It's just a way, again, like Darren said earlier, to fine tune your fertilizer program. It's tremendously helpful to have data rather than guessing on how did you do with your fertilizer program.
The key point here is there is data available for you if you just go out and take some plant tissue and send it into the lab. The other thing is the cost is very low. It costs roughly, depending on where you're sending it to, about $20 per sample to get plant tissue analysis. So let's just say you've got a problem area out on a farm. You're going to take a sample in a good area of the field and a bad area of the field. So you got 2 samples each week for 10 weeks. That's $40 a week times 10. It's $400, and you can solve your problems out in the field for the next 20 or 30 years by fixing whatever you learned from the tissue sample.
Well, when you're out pulling tissue samples, we also encourage you to scout your fields. You may find our Weed of the Week will tell you how to stop it on your farm coming up next.